What it does is up to you.
Hello, and welcome to this week's Q&A with the research team. We're going to be talking about Masterclass. We're going to be talking about CopyCat. My name's Adam. I'm the product manager at Foundry for machine learning projects, and I'm going to be joined shortly by some people from the research team. Recently, we have released a CopyCat Masterclass, and so if you haven't checked it out, be sure to go and check it out afterwards. It might be that we don't pick up some of the questions that are already answered in that masterclass. So there's lots of great stuff there. I hope you all get a chance to check it out. Okay, hello everyone. So thanks for joining me. Guys, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, I can go first. So hi everyone, my name is Mairead. I'm a senior research engineer on the research team, specifically on the AI research team. So I've been at Foundry for about 4 years and have been working on some of the AI plugins, so things like CopyCat, the inference node, upscale deblur, and the catry, so the models that are in the catry. So yeah, that's me. I'm happy to answer your questions today.
So I'll go next. Hi everyone, I'm Johanna. I am also a senior research engineer in machine learning at Foundry. I'm part of the research team. I've been at Foundry for 5 years now, and I've been involved in the creation of many of our released machine learning tools, including today's topic, Nuke CopyCat, but also the deblur and upscale nodes, the catry, and earlier on the Nuke ML client server. It's great to be here.
Hi, hello, I'm Luca. I'm the machine learning data specialist for the research team. One of my responsibility is to play with CopyCat and figure out what it can and cannot do, and then bring that knowledge out to you guys, the artists. Very happy to be here and looking forward to the questions.
Awesome, thanks guys. Well, before we dig into the questions from the group, we've had a few submitted in advance, and in fact the first one was asking about how to lay out your Nuke script for training. And Luke, I believe you prepared a little video to illustrate this, so let's roll the video.
In general, there are two main ways to set up your Nuke script for a single shot training. There is the mirrored approach, in which you take your plate and split it into streams, one in which you will do the work, and the other one in which you will leave your plate untouched. The value of this workflow is that it's very easy to understand what's going on, as there are two clear streams of work. However, there are a couple of downsides. It's very easy to have an image mismatch, for example. A common mistake is to select your nodes and create your append clip from the selection. The issue of doing it this way is that when you repeat the append clip creation, you may have a different order of pipes, as you can see here. The other issue is that the script will grow quite big very quickly. This is not a problem if you're working with a few keyframes, but when things need to grow, you'll find yourself to have to copy a lot of things around, and it can get quite messy. The other approach is the shuffle workflow. The key difference is that you split the streams after you will append the clips. You do that by shuffling your plate into a different layer, in this scenario the motion layer, and then do the work on your RGB layer. After that, you append your clips together, and then you split your data stream by shuffling your untouched layer, the motion layer, into the RGB layer, and pass that into CopyCat. There are a few positive outcomes of this workflow. The script is clearer, and it's easier to make it grow. It's also much harder to have an image mismatch, as there is only one append clip node. The main downside of this workflow, however, is that there are some nodes that perform operation on all layers, or they don't copy the extra layers down the stream. Therefore, you will need to pay attention to that a bit more. Overall, I prefer to use the second approach, as it keeps the script cleaner and lighter. Also, it gets a little easier to manage what's going on when the dataset grows. For example, in this script I have 10 starting inputs, which then grow into more inputs because I'm cropping them. If I would go for the mirror approach, the script would easily become very big and very messy, and it would become a pain to manage.
I hope that helped some people out there. So I'm going to jump into some of the questions from the chat. We had Ajanori ask, can I have multiple layer masks trained at the same time? For example, red channel in the front, green channel in the middle, and blue channel in the back, and so on. Who has an answer for this?
I can take that. Yeah, we have multiple layers being supported in CopyCat, so you can pass in, 8, 9, 10, or 3 or 4 layers, and each channel can contain something different. One caveat I would say is I would maybe not try and use each layer to represent something that's completely different. So if you were using one layer that represented an alpha mask and something else that represented something completely different, it might be very hard for CopyCat to learn how to replicate 2 things at once. So sometimes it's useful to try and maybe keep those layers representing things that might maybe help each other during the learning process or be in some way related. So that would be my 2 cents on that.
Something else to add on this is like if you're planning to do this for doing some masking and you want to have, I don't know, the red channel for masking one object and the green channel for another object, so on and so forth. This can work, but at the point of intersection with this object, it probably will fail because it will I don't imagine CopyCat will be able to keep consistencies along those edges. But theoretically, you can train that way, as Mairead said.
Yeah, and one extra thing I would say as well is that it's good to keep separate objects in each separate channels, meaning that it's good to have an object in the red channel and an object in the blue channel. But if you're starting to have like a green color, which is a mix of 2 channels, it could confuse the CopyCat model just because you have the same channel having to understand multiple objects. So it's kind of good to have like different semantic blocks in its own channel.
Fantastic. We have another question from Aginori, and he says, or they say, should I say, I feel that sometimes the results are better if I do not crop. Does this mean that the more time it takes, the better the learning results? So what are the downsides of not cropping, first of all? And when would it be a good idea to use the whole frame in the training set?
I guess I can take this. Cropping or not cropping. So cropping is generally useful when the effect you're trying to do takes only a very small portion of your frame, and therefore, because during the training we take random crops from your frame, you don't know how often what you're trying to achieve is going to be seen by CopyCat over your training time. So cropping really helps if what you're trying to achieve is a localized effect. If instead you're trying to do something where you're changing the whole frame, probably not cropping really, helps, because it doesn't matter which crop is CopyCat taking, because it's always, something is always happening. I would suggest taking a look at the masterclass. There is a very in-depth section about cropping and how it can help the training. So yeah, check it out.
On a subject of that, somebody asked for tips about large data sets and how to add this. Let me see if I can find who asked this question. Yeah, Salvador. So how can I design my scripts if I want to create a generalized model for masking a character and preventing what he calls catastrophic forgetting if the data set will be growing over time? So I guess, first of all, what happens if you have a large data set you've trained and you want to add some more images to it? And if you want to, is there a best approach there?
Yeah, so maybe I can take that. I guess one of the first things is to describe what catastrophic forgetting is. So let's say you've trained your model on an already large data set and you want to continue training by making this data set bigger. If you only start retraining on this smaller set of images, the model will forget the first part of the training that it was trained on. So it tends to have a very recent, he remembers the recent information, but a bit less of the ancient information, which means that we generally recommend to add the new images to your entire data set and either resume training on that or start training from scratch.
Sorry, Adam.
I was going to say,
oh,
go ahead.
Okay, well, to add to this, like, I guess if like the images you're adding are a very small portion of your data set and you want to ensure that these images are seen often enough, you can use nodes like the frame range node to increase how many of these frames you have. Let's say you have one stream of data that is going in and it's only one image. And let's say you wanted to make it become 10, you just have add the frame range node above CopyCat and you say that that stream is going to have a frame range of 10. And now it's taking a bigger proportion in your data set, and therefore you have more chance to see it. Obviously, now I said 10, that's a random number. It can be 20 or 50, depending obviously how big is your data set and how much you want that image to be seen in relation to the rest of the data set. And then you can train.
So you're increasing the frequency with which CopyCat will visit those new images by making them take up a larger proportion of the frames in the training set. Nice.
Yeah, and also if you don't mind, in some cases you might not mind the forgetting as well. So let's say if you have like your pre-trained model and you just want to use that pre-trained model to fine-tune on a specific shot. So like, you want to overfit on a new shot, then in that case, it can be completely valid to just start training from that pre-trained checkpoint, but only use that new data. So, you could see this where you have pre-trained models, and for each shot, you could just fine-tune for 1 or 2 frames in that new shot, and that would be a valid workflow as well.
Thanks, Johanna. Next question I've got here is, training on a single machine is faster as compared to training on multiple machines, presumably using the distributed training feature. And his hypothesis is because of the IP6 is not supported on Linux. I don't think that's the case. I think it's quite complex as to say when distributed training will benefit. Who's got some tips here for a good rule of thumb?
I can talk a little bit about this. So for the distributed training, one thing that's important to know first is that all your machines should have the same specs. So they should have the same GPU type or the same number of GPUs. And the reason for that is that your less good GPU will be the bottleneck for your training. So what's happening with distributed training is that each machine are sharing some information during training. So you need, for it to be faster, you kind of need to be able to take advantage of the compute on each machine. So that would mean that you need to increase the batch size so that each machine is processing a big amount of information, and that amount of information being computed is higher than the actual messaging and latency in between each machine.
To add to this, a good indication if you're unsure whether you should be distributing your training, what you can do if you're on Linux or on Windows is to check your GPU usage, which is not the GPU memory, is how much your GPU is, the processing power is being used. And if it's at 100% and you have a bigger data set, then you can start distributing. If it's not 100%, there is not very much value in distributing, because then it's just going to reduce the GPU usage, and lower GPU usage means slower training.
Yeah, and also one thing that's interesting is that the more the GPU doesn't mean that it's going to get better. So like it's this thing where, because each machine is going to communicate with each of them, like you might have a better training speed if you use only 2 or 4 machines compared to, I don't know, 16, 30. So sometimes it's better to really, as Luca is saying, check on a smaller amount of machines, check your GPU performance, your GPU usage, and you can go from there as well.
I would say we've outlined 3 scenarios in the release notes for Nuke 15 and 14.1 when we released distributed training, that try and illustrate what those different scenarios are based on the data set size and the number of nodes in your render farm. It's worth having a look at that to give you a rule of thumb, but yeah, it's still not a simple answer, unfortunately. Next, I just want a big shout out to Hugo and all the friends you brought along to the stream. Great to have you here. Thanks so much. Keep the questions coming. I'm just going to dip into some of the other ones. So other than matting, what are other good use cases for CopyCat? Where else is it successful, and where maybe doesn't it work so well?
I guess I can start here. Good use cases that we've seen so far, I guess there aren't good and bad use cases, but other interesting use cases that we've seen so far is obviously beauty work, where people need to, I don't know, remove blemishes, bruises, scars, all this type of stuff. I've seen it done on wig removal, on the seam for the wig. So all of this type of stuff where you're trying to do work within a silhouette. That always is great. We've seen it doing image synthesis, like as you've seen in the scissor reel. We've done performance transfer, generating a face from an SD map, going from an SD map to an RGB of a face, in this case, my face, because I didn't have access to other people, but it still works. It can do style transfer. I've seen another very cool use case recently of a different type of image synthesis in a tutorial where someone was generating eyes with from passing an RGB generated with Roto shape. It was passing that into CopyCat, and that was generating eyes, and it was using then the Roto shape to control the eyes, the gaze, and this type of stuff, which is very cool. Something also that it really excels at is removing complex reflection. And I think this one is like someone that it's like a use case that not many people knows about. But if you have to remove reflection from complex objects like, I don't know, water or cars where there is a strong distortion, CopyCat will do a very good job there. And it's generally like, it's very hard to do this by hand, and CopyCat will save you a lot of time there. Trying to think of any other, I don't know, John and Mairead, if you have any.
No, I was going to say, I know that when we were chatting about this earlier, we were kind of saying, if you think about how CopyCat works under the hood, it's very good at nearly doing like a patch matching kind of thing, where you're trying to find patches in your input that match your ground truth so that you can map something from your input to your ground truth. So if you have a use case that works in that kind of a situation, CopyCat will work really well. So as long as, you know, if it can in some way find some correspondences between that input and that ground truth image and to map things, it's a good case for CopyCat.
I just thought of some more other very cool ones that I've seen. Sorry if I'm gonna spill a bit more here. Is someone at Framestore used it to
Don't name names.
But we've made an article about this.
Okay.
Anyways, to do highlight generation. So like they had the clamp footage and they wanted to bring the high dynamic range from the high dynamic footage into the clamp version of the footage. Yeah, I think that's it.
I think image synthesis, like in painting and things like that, works quite well. Like marker removal, as you were saying, like filling in highlights. Like, you know, if you had a camera crew on the highlights from a car, like CopyCat would work really well because it's within the silhouette, and it's also quite good because it's good at removing the information and at tracking that. So that's a good one.
Some of the really interesting use cases I've seen from customers is people trying to do things in animated content and trying to change the way sort of hand-painted things look and make things feel more hand-painted, the sort of painterly effect. And there's been some really interesting work there. And I think that's probably less well documented. So hopefully we can get some case studies out there eventually.
I think that's the other point, is that we have seen things being used, like CopyCat being used in places that we didn't really consider it being used. And I think that's what's really nice, is that if you want to try something, give it a go in CopyCat and see if it works, because you know, we've mentioned some, but there's so many different places that you could use it, and just give it a try and see if it does what you need it to do.
And let us know if it does.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so I'm just scanning the questions. Are you planning to provide smaller models than the deep learn model that are trained for reproducing the input identity? Because the deep learn is a large model and smaller ones are faster for single shots. So I guess more initial weights is. Are we planning to add any more initial weights? Maybe. We're definitely interested in adding to that, and we're doing some experiments to see where it's useful. The specific case here for the deblur as a starting point, I don't think we've considered necessarily doing a smaller one, but maybe send us in specific examples where you think it's useful. It's always good to hear. Sorry, I'm not very good at reading the chat and asking the questions at the same time. I'll ask one of my questions, pre-canned questions. Okay, I guess this one's maybe for you, Luca. So in the masterclass, we talk about data augmentation for synthesizing extra ground truth and input images, and we talk about doing sort of transform augmentation and color and lighting augmentation. But I've heard you talk in the past about doing motion blur augmentation. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. So sometimes it happens that like in your shot you have motion blur, and you may have already prepared your data, and you realize that there is different size of motion blur throughout the shot after you created your data. And sometimes, because thanks to data augmentation, you can just create new data in easy ways. And Nuke provides you quite a big suite of tools to create camera effects. You can use these tools to essentially fabricate these missing frames that you didn't include at the beginning of your training. So for example, with motion blur, something I've done before is that like I would take maybe just one frame with motion blur, create the effect I want to do, and then just create a directional blur and maybe create multiple directional blur and pass through CopyCat also different blur lines, so that I can cover this range of motion blur, and then CopyCat can learn what to do when the blur is just more intense. When you do this, try to keep in mind to bring back also the grain, because sometimes if like sometimes the grain may affect, like if you're applying inference on something that is grain and you you train on grain footage only, it may not work when it sees the grain. So like if you then blur it, you probably want to bring the grain on top of the blur back. Otherwise, it's just not gonna activate, or may activate only in certain areas and not in the others. But yeah.
Thanks, Luca. So the next one I've got here is, how much does consistent resolution or framing play into the success of CopyCat? I tried to model to mask someone's face using both the close-up and medium shots, and it seemed to eventually break down. Do you have to, is there a necessity to keep the subject of your effect in the same part of the frame, or is the model with its cropping going to visit different areas of the frame anyway?
I think it goes back to that idea of selecting your input shot or your input and your ground truth correctly. I know we had said, you know, CopyCat can only learn from what it has seen before. So if you pass in a frame that's close up on someone, and then you're passing in a medium shot, they can look quite different to CopyCat. So it's a good idea to balance your data and make sure that you're taking enough samples from that shot that's close up and enough samples from that shot that's medium. Because if you maybe give it more shots that are close up, it mightn't work as well on the medium framing, and vice versa. So if you want it to work on both, make sure you sample enough inputs and ground truth frames from both shots to make it work.
Yeah,
but the inputs don't need to be the same resolution or framing, right?
Can you repeat the question? Oh,
sorry. How much does the consistent resolution and framing play into the success of CopyCat?
Well, I mean, you should train in the resolution that you're planning to do inference on, because, I mean, the CopyCat model is a model which is learning a form of coarse-to-fine resolution training, which means that it might work on different resolution size because of the way it's built, but you would get the best results if you're training on the resolution that you're planning to infer on, I'd say.
Yeah, oh, sorry, Adam, go.
I was going to say, isn't the random cropping going to visit, it's going to be training on the same aspect and resolution for each crop, right? Does it make any difference if your input images are different resolutions?
It does, especially if you're doing not a generalized training for a specific shot. If you start training on 1080p and then you want to do your inference at 4K, the distribution of those pixels would be very different to what they look like when they are in a crop of 256. So it just will not work as well. Obviously, if you're doing a large data set training, you have a broad, you have many different type of resolution. So then it will learn that the pixel distribution doesn't matter. But if you're just feeding two shots or 2 frames from 2 different shots, it will not probably be enough.
Yeah, and on top of that, the crop size will, probably the right crop size will change depending on your input resolution. So that's just a matter of scale, right? But if you want to have something which changes, I don't know, the mouth color, the lips color, or something like that, and you're having an 8K footage, then you probably will have to increase your crop size so that it's able to see and start understanding the different bits in the face. So that's something that I think was interesting. Like we had heard that, for instance, lower crop size are better at a small pixel effect like deep blur and upscale. But if you want to have something which is a bit more semantic, it's good to increase it to 256, 512.
Thanks, folks, and thanks, Frank, for the question. I've lost my position. How can I use ModNet to downres 1 to 2, 1 to 4? I'm not sure I understand that. Does anyone know what that means? He means this is from Roro Pioro.
I was just wondering if ModNet, I don't know, Luca, I think that might be one that actually works specifically on some resolutions. So I think it works specifically with certain types of image size. So I think within the Gizmo for ModNet, we might resize the image. Am I right in saying that, Luca?
No, I think that's Midas that has like a specific resolution restriction. Can I use ModNet in downres? So I wouldn't use the viewer downres because because they're Gizmo, they can be a bit funky what's happening there. If you want to downres it, I would probably use the reformat node before the Gizmo. Also, most of these models are trained to work. They're not trained on 8K plates, so they probably give you better result at smaller resolutions rather than higher resolution. Obviously, if you're doing it for matting, this is not going to be ideal if you're trying to mat something at 6K because you will not have all the details. But I also imagine that ModNet, it was still not going to give you the details you want at 6K. So, but yeah, I would use a reformat node before the Gizmo, and instead, if you do want to try and keep those details, just put it after the Gizmo. But it's still going to be quite slow.
Thanks, Luca. So the next question, regarding the cat file creator, the created model will process a frame as a whole. Is there an option to use a tile process like CopyCat does? Isn't the tiling just during training, or is there a tiling process during inference?
I mean, we have a tiling process for inference. I don't know which one this mentioned to. We have a tiling which is just in case you kind of can't process a full image at once, it will tile the image and process the grid, the 4 split blocks separately, and then just compile them back together. For tiling, there is not really training with tiling. The training is done with the training crops.
I see. So I think I'm misunderstanding there. I think he means running inference in a tiled manner, so you can, I guess, use a larger model.
Yeah, we didn't. So we have tiling in upscale. We didn't put it in the inference node because when we created inference, it was only able to run CopyCat models. And when we did our test, if you would do tiling on shot-specific models, it would injure the result because it wouldn't see what it was trained on. So we didn't end up putting it there. But I guess you could create your own tiling by splitting your plate. It's not ideal, but theoretically you can create your own tiling. But there is a way for now.
Yeah, that was the reason. For some models, depending on how it's trained, it could give you poor results. So we didn't have it as an option for any model.
But if it is something that you think would be useful, do let us know because we can add that in. It's an option we could do. So if you do have any feature requests for inference, let us know and we can look into it.
Yeah, definitely send those in. Probably best to send them via support. And thanks, Lucas, for that question. Artem asks, I've noticed when doing cleanup work with epochs less than 80,000, I've seen a lot of RGB artifacting within the crop zone. Is this normal? When I increase to 100,000 plus, the artifacts decrease to a degree.
From my experience, there isn't very specific set number of epochs for every use case. It really depends. But if you do see the artifacts, it means the model is probably not trained. It seems a bit odd that you have artifacts after 80,000 epochs. Maybe what comes to mind is that you maybe have super whites or super blacks in your image. Probably not super blacks, but maybe super whites, and that is causing the model to do some funky stuff. But like something I always tell to everybody is like, if you see artifacts, let your model train for longer and the artifacts will go away.
Yeah, and check as well for something like a mismatch. Like you could have like a mismatch which is not that obvious, like maybe like even a simple 1 pixel mismatch can confuse the model and it would take longer to converge. So maybe like checking that as well would be a good one, because I agree with Luca. It feels to me like it tends to learn the identity on beauty shots in 5,000-10,000 steps. Like it tends to manage to have that earlier on rather than later.
I would say, though, if you are seeing specific parts of your image that aren't working, maybe just double check that your input data is correct and that you're capturing all of that information in your input data. So if it's a specific part of the image that's not working, maybe crop around that and make sure that's in your input and your ground truth to make sure that the model has seen it. Because otherwise you might get RGB artifacts there even after 80,000 steps. It just won't know what to do with that part of the image. So yeah, double check your inputs are capturing the areas that you have those errors.
Thank you very much. Okay, Moose Works says, trying to manage hundreds of shots that need the same effect, what would be the best approach to train a generalized model for that effect over hundreds of shots?
It really depends on how different those shots are. So if they look similar, meaning like they are like, I don't know, over the shoulder type of dialogue effects, and you need to work in the same areas and it's all under the same lighting condition, probably you don't need to prep a lot of work. I mean, like if you, let's say you've done, out of 100, you've done 10 shots, probably that would be enough to do a training that would work on the rest, assuming that, like, again, there isn't very much change in that. If instead you you're trying to do the same effect, but you go from daytime to nighttime to indoor to outdoors, and there is a very drastic change between all of them, unless you have already that data ready, I would probably just split it by scene and train a model for each scene, and then do the same approach as I said before, where you first try and get like one shot working. Once you have that shot working, then you try and propagate to the rest of the shots.
So something you might be useful to know is in Nuke 14 and 15, sorry, 14.1 and 15, you can now in Nuke Studio and Hero add inference to the timeline. So you could add a soft effect for using your cat file and review your shots en masse. It's a really nice way to be able to see how it works on the different shots and review it. But then obviously you need to select your frames and jump back in to refine the model when you find areas that it's not working so well. But yeah, I guess the size of the data set is the difficult thing here. How many, say they're all 100 shots are set across 3 scenes, what's a rough ballpark number of input images you think we'll be looking at?
I would try and not think it as input images, but I would try and think it as shots. So I would take maybe one every time frame on 5 shots per scene, maybe, and start with something like that. And then, but these assume obviously that you have already done that shots done. This work is, otherwise I would start like if I don't have any of the data, I would probably take, I would probably do assuming there, again, like there are 3 scenes, they're all very similar, I would probably take a couple of frames or 3 frames for each shot, do the work there, and then do a training and see if it works on the rest. But what I've seen is that with this type of stuff, because there can be things that go wrong and it takes time, I find it easier sometimes to just make the model work on one shot. And once I know the recipe for one shot, then it's much easier to propagate it to the rest, instead of having a lot of variables and trying to figure out what's happening at the same time.
Thanks, Luca. Salvador again asks, how can you make a generalized model accessible for the artists? Is there a way to name it and pull it into the initial weights the same way you do with deblur and upscale? So how is the initial weights populated? Is it just based on what's in the directory, or is the code required, or is that a feature request we need to add?
I think it sounds like a feature request. It's not. I don't think it's dynamically populated in the based on what's in the directory. Correct me if I'm wrong, Johanna or
Yeah,
Mairead.
I think you just need to put the actual full file path. So I think when you decide to start from like another checkpoint than one of the one we give as a pre-trained models, you kind of have like, you get your file location and you have to put the full path to be able to do that.
You could create some other ways, like if you are into scripting, you can create a custom pull down that points to the file direction, and then you, with some TCL, you can point to the pull down that points to the other direction. But if you need to deliver to many artists, this may be a solution. Otherwise, again, just put the directory to where it's supposed to be.
I think I've heard this request before, though. I think it'd be really valuable to be able to customize that initial weights to either with an API or just based reflecting on some directory structure. We'll take that one down. I saw a question a little while back. I think I maybe passed it now, which was, is CopyCat not in Nuke Indie? Oh yeah, Nick Hill asked, am I understanding correctly that Nuke Indie does not have CopyCat features? I don't believe that's the case. As far as I'm aware, that Nuke Indie, Nuke Non-Commercial, and the Education Collective all have CopyCat.
I believe they do have CopyCat. They may just create a restricted version of those CAT file, so that like those CAT files wouldn't, I think they are not able to be opened in Nuke, but you can open Nuke CAT files into Non-Commercial and Indie. I'm just double checking now, because I'm curious. Yeah, it's available in Indie.
Martin asks, how many sharp frames does CopyCat need to recover one frame that missed focus? So if you've got a shot and you're trying to bring the one frame that is out of focus back into focus, how many ground truth would you need?
Again, go, Johanna, sorry.
I mean, I'll let you go after Luca, but I feel like it would probably depend. Like, let's say if you have like a frame which is fully in focus, which is the same actor in like a similar, like kind of like direction lighting as the one which is blurred, I'd say that potentially just one would work. But if you don't have a focused frame which is similar to your out of focus one, then maybe you might need a few more. I don't know, Luca, if you have.
Yeah, I was just gonna add that like we have a tutorial out there to do the blurring with CopyCat, in which we have we're working on a single shot, and there are 200 frames I think of a sequence, and the pull focus goes out for 50 frames, and it goes like slightly out of focus, very out of focus to back in sharp, and for that one I think we used 5 or 6 frames roughly, and then cropped around various areas to show only the areas that we cared about. But there isn't really a set numbers of frame for all of this type of stuff. It really depends how much out of focus is going, how much the shot is similar. Obviously, if the more data you have, the better the result is going to be. But there isn't really a number.
Thanks. So Gentry Davison asks, can CopyCat be used commercially? So CopyCat, if you're training from scratch, then it's only using your data, so it's completely safe. And in fact, if you're using the initial weights, we've trained those on a data set that we've assembled, and all of the images have a commercially permissible license. So everything in product is safe to be used commercially. The things that are not so safe are the catry models. So if you're not familiar with the catry, that's the library on our website of open source models, where we've taken the research, wrapped them up as cat files, and made them available. And in many cases, in all cases, the models are open source, but the data sets that they're trained on may not be, and it's up to you to make a decision of how comfortable you are in each of those cases, which want to make them available to you. But anything that we put into product, we wouldn't do so if it wasn't with a commercially usable data set. Starling VFX asks, have you considered improving the speed at which CopyCat trains in the upcoming versions of Nuke? Often it tends to be very slow. Well, I don't know which version you've been using, because it's improved a lot since it was originally introduced by orders of magnitude. We do have some tricks up our sleeve for Nuke 51, but they're still in progress, so I don't think we want to make any promises yet. But watch this space. It's obviously something we care about. Vincent asks, will you be adding to the catry imminently? We've got a couple in progress at the moment. Luca, why don't you tell us what's going on?
Yeah, so we have been working on creating the 2 gizmos, one for the segment anything model from Meta, which is, I think you all know, but if you don't, is a model where you can segment any object in the image. You can either put a point and track that point and segment a specific object, or you can go in segment anything model and it just creates a cryptomat style look that then you can use. There are some caveats to these models as always, but we are aiming to put them there anyways. And then the other model we are planning to put in is called Llama, which is, I don't remember what it stands for, but it's an
Large mask in painting.
There you go. It's an in-painting model where you just pass a mask and then it fills in that mask with some pixels based on the content of the surrounding areas. Yeah.
Thanks, Luca. So those, we hope to have them out imminently. One of them, I can't remember which, requires a change to the format of the catry models because it exceeds the maximum size that we previously had. So in Nuke 15.1, there'll be a change to the structure of cat files so that we can support those larger models. It will mean that you need Nuke 15.1 to be able to use them, but they will be available within the same sort of time frame as 15.1, so imminently, hopefully. Any tips for training Roto on thin objects like shoelaces, hair, moving rope? I get a lot of jitters even in high steps training.
Yeah, it's a hard problem. I once was working on a feature and I had to Roto hair, lots of hair. Luckily for me, it was going out of focus and in focus, and the background was a bit blurry, so it was, hard to say what was going on. But just, yeah, it's really hard to Roto stuff that is like a couple of pixels wide. And as it's hard for you, it's hard also for CopyCat to see it. Generally, the good rule of thumb is like, if you cannot quite tell what it is, probably CopyCat can't tell either. So yeah, not very many tips there.
And also, it's very semantic in blocks. I know for Roto, you can be more like bits of a semantic object. So for a Roto for a hand, you would have a half palm that you would like to track. And if you see your palm doesn't have as many tracking points or information, so it will tend to struggle a bit more, whereas it would do better if you're taking the full hand at first. So I think it's definitely it's tricky to try to segment a part of an object when the edge of the object is in a flat surface, for instance, flat area.
Thanks, Johanna. Masood asks, can I train a model to make the green screen even and flat?
I think you would be able to do that. I'm not sure how would that work at areas of intersection where this is the same problem when you try and make an even flat with current tools. You always need a mat for what you don't want to touch, right? So I'm not sure if CopyCat would do any better when you start getting close to the hair, but you definitely can try to train one. I think it will work good on the majority of the thing. You may need to do garbage masks around the humans. I don't know. It would be an interesting use case to try.
Thanks, Lucas. So apologies if I'm pronouncing people's names wrong here, but Sneshasis asked, I'd love to know if Bezier roto shapes can be generated from masks using CopyCat. This is an area we're actively researching and have been for a little while. We know that Beziers are the best way to manipulate Roto when it goes wrong, and so we are working on it. It's a tough problem. CopyCat can't do this, so we have to take a different approach. But just know it's something we're working very hard on. could you explain how the catry raft algorithm deals with motion blur? I've encountered issues with motion blur affecting accuracy. Are there any techniques or optimizations in the algorithm? Does anyone have an answer for that?
I don't particularly. I can give you some cheap tricks, but I'm not sure if they would work. Something to try, because considering also raft is very computational intensive, I would suggest to try to simply reduce your input resolution and see. And then obviously, if you reduce the input resolution, when you upscale it, you also need to multiply your vectors. I would try with that and see if that does anything. Not sure if it would. Otherwise, you can try and stick in a dibbler node above the Gizmo. Again, not sure what would that do, but yeah, I don't really have any other tips on this. And I'm not sure even if what I said is going to be helpful at all.
Thanks for the question, Todo. Let's see what we got next. Lucas asks, do you have any ideas for unsupervised trainings of CopyCat? It would be nice for face swaps and other generative tasks.
I mean, I think we're always keeping an eye on the ways that we can improve CopyCat and add things to it. Obviously, at the minute, it's only supervised. So you pick your input and your ground truth and do it that way. We, are always keeping an eye on the loss functions that we could add in to make these things better. So possibly we'll consider something in future. But at the minute, CopyCat is supervised and will only be that for the minute, I guess.
Okay, very diplomatic answer. Thanks, Mairead. What else do we have? How can I fix rolling shutter properly? This is maybe outside of the scope of CopyCat.
For this, however, there is a nice Gizmo that we send the GitHub link to. I don't remember what's the name, but we can definitely maybe put the link to this in the YouTube Live. I'm not sure. But there is a Gizmo that has been made from a plugin that is available online to fix rolling shutter, and it uses vector generator, I think, to create the in-between frames. I don't remember the name though.
Okay, yeah, I'm not sure how we can share that. Maybe we can add it to the chat afterwards. Oh, I think we're running dry. Is there a way to use CopyCat to train a custom model to help with retime artifacts similar to raft? So it's not possible to train another model using CopyCat. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but the implementation is deeply tied to the model architecture, right? So we wouldn't be able to swap something else out in.
But are we talking retime in like creating interpolation frame and like retiming, like slowing down the footage or something like that?
Yeah.
Because if we're talking about that, you could potentially use CopyCat and your input could just be like 2 frames, like maybe frame 1 and 3 concatenated, and your ground truth could be frame 2. And I think like this probably would have some good success in being able to generate middle frame. So I think you can reproduce this effect by doing something like this.
There are many pre-trained models already online. Will you make it easy for people to bring in pre-trained models into CopyCat? I tried some PyTorch conversions into Cat, but it wasn't possible. So do you have any tips, or what are the limitations at the moment that make it difficult for using the Cat file creator?
Yeah, I think I guess we have done some conversions ourselves, and it can be tricky to convert a model into the TorchScript format. We have tried to make documentation online to make it a bit easier. So if you haven't seen it, we do have a cat file creation reference guide, which is available online, and that gives some tips and tricks on how to convert models to TorchScript format, especially in the format that we need it to be in for Nuke. We've also found that Googling, people have also tended to do this, and you can find any errors that you tend to have when you're doing this TorchScript conversion. They do tend to be online on things like Stack Overflow. So definitely try and Google things. There could be some limitations though with the fact that, maybe there's a layer that's only supported in PyTorch, 2 point something, and we're obviously using an earlier version of PyTorch in Nuke. So if that was the case, you possibly might not be able to convert that to TorchScript for use in the catry. But obviously we're trying to keep PyTorch up to date so that we can bring the latest models in, get them converted so people can bring them in. So we're always trying to keep up to date and trying to get you guys the latest version of PyTorch in Nuke. If you have any problems, you could reach out as well. We have, as I said, we've done some converting ourselves. We might have come across the error if you're really finding it hard. But yeah, it can be a tricky process, but try and use the documentation online and forums and things. They can help.
Something I would add as well, just in case the question on that, because it was about easy to be able to bring in pre-trained models into CopyCat. And so I don't know if that question meant, oh, can I convert any kind of like existing model to cat, and then can I use that as an initial pre-trained checkpoint? And the answer to that would be no, actually, most of the time, unless the model that was used initially was CopyCat. CopyCat it has its own architecture, right? So you wouldn't be able to take any model, convert it to cat file, and use that as a base. So this is like, there is both, right? Like you can convert it to cat file and then use it as an inference outside of CopyCat, but you wouldn't have the capacities to just retrain using CopyCat and using this as a pre-trained checkpoint, because they would have different architectures.
Thanks, Johanna. Do we have access to the CopyCat and all of its components through the Nuke NDK? I think the answer is no, right? So you have you can control CopyCat with the Python NDK, Python SDK, but not the NDK, right? If you want it, the only way to interact with PyTorch is if you import your torch script as a cat file.
Yeah.
I got that right?
Yeah.
It might be that we want to provide some examples of how to build. If you wanted to build something more complex, we might provide some examples of how to build an NDK plugin that utilizes PyTorch, but we don't have anything out there at the moment. Vincent asks, is there a plan to implement training that would result in data instead of images? For example, training a model to output position values or counting objects in a frame? I guess the answer is no, we don't have a plan to do that. It's something that we're thinking about, obviously, as we add more and more machine learning tools, that they're not just image to image, and we want to create the framework for being able to do that, but it's not imminent, I'm afraid.
Yeah, right now it would be like a very hacky way, like, like for instance, you could have your output, the information being only in the first like 4 pixels of your image output or something like that. But yeah, like there is no like straight to metadata training right now, though there is a few workarounds.
We have actually done that ourselves with some models where we have output positional values into the first 4 pixels and then written a Gizmo to kind of grab that information and use it. So there is ways around it if you need it. And we've tried it, and it gets us there.
I would say though that if you're trying to train CopyCat to do that, probably it's better to just output to the full frame rather than the 4 pixel, because I'm not sure what you're gonna get otherwise.
Yeah, that's true.
Okay, Joe asks, can you speak a little about the correlation between cropping a training image to just have the area affected and crop size in the CopyCat node? Always getting the error that my crop size is too small.
Yeah, I think we actually have a part of the tutorial, the masterclass actually deals with that. So we have a video on cropping and how important it is and picking the right crop size. I guess in terms of crop size, the thing to remember is it's all about grabbing context. So the kind of context you would need to create an effect. So if your crop size is too small and you were trying to edit the face, but your crop only captured a little small portion of the face, CopyCat might not be able to tell what part of the face that is because it can't see the eyes and the nose and the mouth. So in that case, you might have to increase your crop size to make sure that it can see a bit more of the face and know what you're trying to edit and how CopyCat can edit that. So I think in terms of crop size, definitely check out the video that we have in the masterclass. I think there was another part of that question. Was it about cropping?
Yeah, I think there is maybe there is one part about the fact that getting the error that the crop size is too small. And I think so when you're adding a cropped image as a training input, that cropped image needs to be bigger than the crop size you're using for training the model. Because as we are saying, the crop size in the CopyCat tab, we are actually randomly picking crops within your training input. So if your training input is less than 256 by 256, and your crop size is 256 by 256, then you're going to have an error. So in that case, it generally means that you just need to take a slightly bigger crop as a training image, and you should be able to work with that.
All right, I think that's all the time we have today. So thanks everyone for joining us. It's been really great to hear your questions. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you did, please like and subscribe, and hopefully we'll do one of these again in the not too distant future. Yeah, thanks so much for joining us.